It's 6 o'clock. I'm Simon Oxley. The headlines: Milton Keynes woman campaigning for grandparents' rights. President Trump sacks his acting Attorney General. A new bus link for St Albans commuters.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
A woman from Milton Keynes is lobbying MPs today for better rights for grandparents. Marion Turner runs a support group for grandparents who are denied access to their grandchildren. She hasn't seen her own grandson for 2 years. More from Nicola Hazler.
Marion Turner, who runs the group GranPart, describes not seeing her grandson as a living bereavement. She wants grandparents to have legal rights in family disputes. Currently, grandparents do not have the automatic right to see their grandchildren when parents divorce or children are taken into care. She'll be lobbying MPs and has the support of Dame Esther Ranson and Milton Keynes MP Ian Stewart.
So on the show this morning, we're going to be hearing from a Milton Keynes grandparent who was denied access to her grandson. She's now campaigning for better rights for grandparents to see their grandchildren. Now, we would love to hear from you this morning. If you've experienced this, we want to hear your story. If you are a grandparent, please do give us a call on 03459 455 555.
Andy Collins.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
So it's a story we're going to be discussing all morning. Grandparents, a Milton Keynes woman who runs a support group for grandparents who are denied access to their grandchildren will today lobby MPs for better rights. Marion Turner, who hasn't seen her own grandson for 2 years, describes the loss as a living bereavement. She'll be joined by Dame Esther Ranson and the divorce lawyer Vanessa Lloyd-Platt to push for a change in the law to allow grandparents the right to see their grandchildren. We can speak to Vanessa now, who joins me on the line. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having this issue on, because we need the media to raise the profile of this issue. It is an absolute scandal of what's been happening.
It's our pleasure, and like I said, thank you very much for joining us this morning. What kind of cases do you get involved in then where grandparents are denied access to their grandchildren?
Well, every day of the week we have grandparents who say that because their children are going through a divorce, or there's been a family fallout generally, or separation of the children, that they, but through no fault of their own, they say, there's a unilateral decision by one or other of the children not to allow them to see their grandchildren anymore. And this is particularly painful where they've been really hands-on. They've not only been looking after the children to allow the parents to go to work, they've also financially helped towards things to get them on the property ladder, etc. And they're being pulled ever more into having to go to court, and the system is letting them down.
So why do grandparents currently have no legal rights to see their grandchildren then?
Well, the reality is that if you're a parent, you automatically have parental responsibility. That's the legal rights in respect of your kid. If your children are on the if your name is on the birth certificate. As a grandparent, you do not have that right. You have no automatic right to see your grandchildren. And if you want to, and all other options have failed, you can't agree it, or you've tried out mediation and that hasn't worked, then you've only got one option: to go to court. But the problem is, with grandparents, they have to first apply for leave of the court to even make an application to see their grandchildren. And that's what we are lobbying about today. It is wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. With hundreds of thousands of grandparents looking after the grandchildren who are cut off to have to get over 2 hurdles. And right around the world, there's only a few countries in the entire world that require leave. Most of them do not, and most of them have it written into their constitution that grandparents' rights should be upheld.
So why are we so slow then to join the party?
Because it's all a financial and political issue. A few years ago, this was looked at by the Family Justice Review, and they then came to the conclusion, after doing a whole report, no, there's no hardship to grandparents to apply for leave. It allows us to weed out the unmeritorious cases. Well, after doing this for 38 years, I can tell you that I have never come across an unmeritorious case for a grandparent. It's so rare, and it's just an excuse used by successive governments. And I'm not blaming Theresa May, because she is phenomenal in supporting families, but I do blame the system that puts this ridiculous hurdle in front of grandparents and also then pulls them into matrimonial cases if they've been kind enough to lend money or give money to their children. Suddenly they can find themselves being brought into a divorce as a party to decide, was that a gift or was it a loan?
I mean, going to it's fascinating to hear what you're saying there as well. That, you know, like you said, we're the last ones to join the party, as they say. I mean, mediation should always be the answer rather than going to court. But sometimes
mediation isn't the answer. Unfortunately, while I'm a great proponent of mediation, it's just not been working. And out of frustration and campaigning for this for so many years, in my own practice, we were forced to set up a different system, which is starting to work very well, where we just say to parents and grandparents, look, come along for an informal meeting, sign up to a system with us that says you will not be rude or disrespectful to each other, and you will put the child at the centre of all of this and see if we can find a resolution. We don't call it mediation because for whatever reason, when you say mediation, either to parents or grandparents, they seem to, in a lot of cases, to shy away from it. But this scandal has got to stop. We, having gone around the world and talked to other judges in other countries that don't require leave, what is really obvious is that they can weed out, if they do think they're these kind of unmeritorious cases, which we haven't found, then they can get rid of them at the first hearing. But they don't require you to apply for leave all over the rest of the world. So why are we so behind in recognising that our more elderly people or grandparents who are now getting younger and younger have such a central place for families in the world, and they have them here because so many thousands of grandparents are looking after their grandchildren. So we now have to put grandparents at the front and not the back of the queue.
And also, I mean, the child has got to be the number one priority here as well, hasn't it?
Well, we have been very much child-focused, but what we also have to understand is that the children desperately need their grandparents at a time of turmoil, when their parents have split up perhaps, or there's a family dispute. The grandchildren will look to the grandparents for help and a quiet ear. And I have one piece of advice for grandparents if you want to avoid these kinds of disputes. We call it the zip it principle. Do not ever try and criticise the parenting of either your daughter-in-law or son-in-law, because that's how most of them get started.
Easier said than done, though, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's very easy to say it. But I'm a grandparent 3 times over, and I'm expecting my 4th one this week. So I know and I understand the principles. But sometimes the temptation to say something, you have to draw yourself back in and say, do I want to have a fantastic relationship with my grandchildren? Yes. So now I have to zip it.
Okay. Sometimes as well, it's just on a separate issue. Sometimes it's a bit too easy to go to the grandparents rather than being a parent. You think, oh, you know what? Grandparents will deal with that, and they use them too much. Does that make sense? Am I making sense when I say that?
Well, it can do, but if they use them a lot for the bad things and then they cut them off from the children who have come to rely on the grandparents to help them with things, then that is even more tragic and even more dreadful.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to do is to raise awareness of all these issues and raise awareness that if you are a grandparent and you want to help out your child, then you've got to be careful about making very clear what the money is for. Is it a loan? Is it a gift? What you don't want in being generous and giving regular amounts to your children is to find that that is regarded as what we call a resource if they ever get divorced. And more grandparents are being pulled in unnecessarily, and we want to raise awareness of all of these issues, but more importantly, we want to force the government and the opposition now to agree that it is high time we got rid of the need for applying for leave for grandparents. It is outmoded, it's outdated, and it is causing such hardship. It's got to go.
Final question. What response are you expecting to get from the MPs today?
Well, we've got quite a lot of them coming today. I mean, we know they're tied up with Brexit. We know they're tied up with issues over Donald Trump. But for God's sake, grandparents at the heart of our society. Why is Britain one of the only places where we tend to ignore the plight of grandparents and the elderly? It is about time we recognise that we should respect the grandparents for what they have been doing for so many years.
Vanessa, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That was the voice lawyer, Vanessa Lloyd-Platt there.
Andy Collins.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
So as we've been talking about all morning on our show, a Milton Keynes woman who runs a support group for grandparents who are denied access to their grandchildren will today lobby MPs for better rights. Marion Turner will join Dame Esther Rantzen and MPs to push for a change in the law to allow grandparents the right to see their grandchildren. We can now speak to both Marion and the Conservative MP for Milton Keynes South, Ian Stewart, who is the patron of Marion's support group, GranPart. We're going to say good morning to you both. Good morning to you, Marion.
Morning.
And good morning to you, Ian.
Good morning.
Marion, I'm going to start with you first, just so our listeners can understand why you started this group. How did you lose contact with your grandson?
It started when my son met someone that already had two very small children, which wasn't a problem for me, but I think it was obviously a problem for her. And we never seemed to be able to form a bond. She didn't really want me to get close to her two children. So then they got married, and then my first grandson arrived, and the problems got worse, really, because I wasn't really even allowed to form a bond with my grandson. Despite several times of trying and offering loads of olive branches, she just made it extremely impossible because she was just so hostile, and she had a very controlling and manipulative nature, of which obviously she sucked my son into. So obviously that had a knock-on effect with the whole family. So it was at least 10 months before my grandson even came to my house, and that was the one and only time that they ever came. And then I put up with it for the first year, and then just before his first birthday, I kind of knocked it on the head because we weren't allowed to see him on his first birthday. So I decided that the only way I was going to cope with it was to walk away, purely for my own sake, really, because when someone breaks your heart, you can't keep letting them walk all over you. My son obviously went along with it because he thought it was the right thing to do. But of course, when you lose your grandson or any grandchild like that, you also lose either your son or your daughter as well, because it goes hand in hand. So then I tried to see if there was a group that I could actually go and talk to, because when you try and talk to family and friends, although they've got a sympathetic ear, it's not the same as talking to someone that's possibly going through it or been through it themselves. So I couldn't find a group. At that time I was living in Milton Keynes, so I decided to start one myself, and then it became apparent once I'd advertised my group, the amount of calls I got from grandparents like myself. Some obviously were different cases. Some hadn't done anything at all to start this hostile.
Marion, that must have been so difficult to walk away.
It was, but it was the only way I could cope with it. It's like being bullied. If you're bullied or treated nastily, you can't hang around and let people do it to you. You have to take control of it. By starting my group, to me, that was a form of solving the problem, because once I found there were other people in my situation, because when it happens to you, you do actually feel very isolated, and you think, even though you haven't done something wrong, you must have done something wrong. So to find other grandparents in that same situation was very comforting for me, and it helped me to get through it.
Ian, I'm going to bring you in here as well. I mean, do you hear similar stories from grandparents that you have spoken to?
Yes, I mean, Marion invited me to a meeting of her group last year, and it was really quite an emotional event because you could see the real emotion and distress that lots of them were going through. You know, for example, sending birthday and Christmas cards and presents and not knowing if they've ever got there to the child. So I remember from my childhood the very strong bond I had with my grandmothers, and that enriches childhood. And for that to be denied because of a family dispute, I just think is wrong. And I think we need to have a fresh look at the law to clarify what rights grandparents should have.
Why are we the only country not to have this already in place? We seem to be the last ones into the party.
Well, we did about 5 or 6 years ago. There was a review, the Norgrove review, which concluded that the existing system was appropriate, and that basically says that if a grandparent does want to have access after sort of informal negotiations haven't worked, then they can apply for a court order. But that can be very expensive. It can be very distressing in itself. And I just think it's probably time to have another look at this and perhaps change the onus around that grandparents do have rights unless there's a good reason not to. Yeah. Every family situation is different, so it's difficult to frame an exact law. But I just think we've got it the wrong way round, and it would be better to have the right, as I say, for access unless there's a very good reason not to.
So this is about putting grandparents on an equal footing with parents. I have to ask you, Marion, what changes in the law do you want to see?
Well, I think just what Ian said, really, because I think once you become a parent or a grandparent, I don't think anyone should have the right to be able to take that away from you. And, okay, yes, you in certain circumstances you can apply to go to the court, but it's at a cost, and it can be very costly, and the process can go on for months. And as pensioners, most of us, that's probably all we have. If you don't have money, thousands of pounds to fight for something which you shouldn't have to. You are a grandparent, so legally I just don't know why people think they can take that away and you have to go to such measures to enforce it. It's wrong.
Okay, and what response are you hoping to get from the MPs today, Marion?
Well, I guess just what Ian said, really. You just need the MPs to get someone. It just needs one person to listen. And I think, I listened to Vanessa's this morning when she was on there. And, she's a very powerful lady. And along with Dame Esther Ranson, hopefully they'll be able to put it across better than possibly someone like myself, because they know what they're talking about. They know all the law. And it just needs to be enforced.
I mean, Ian, how does this lobby day work then? What's the plan of attack today?
Well, it's really a awareness-raising day. MPs need to get the evidence, the information, and hear the stories from people like Marion, so that we're aware of the absolute distress that they feel. And then once what's important with these sort of days is that if you get lots of MPs who are made aware of it, then that can lead to pressure to have another look at the law.
Okay, Marion, just to finish this up before we have to move on, how are things now? I mean, so you still don't see your grandchild at all? You're not talking to your son? What's the outcome?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's taken me 3 years, but I had to be in a good place first, which is where my group came in. That got me into a good place. Once I felt I was in a good place, fortunately, my son is no longer with his wife, so that made things slightly easier because you've got rid of this hostile person that's actually come into your life, destroyed it, and then walked away. But it did make life slightly easier because I started to form a bond again and build my bridge with my son, purely because in my heart I had to sort of
try and forgive him but not forget what he'd done. So it's taken me a long time, and I've seen my grandson once, and that was just before Christmas. I went round to see them, but obviously because he's nearly 4 now, I'm just a stranger. He doesn't know who I am. I was just a lady sitting in the room, and his daddy was talking to me. Do you know what I mean? There was nothing. I didn't expect to go into the room and him to open arms and say, "Oh, hello, Grandma, how are you?" Because he doesn't know me, and I will never ever get those 3 years back.
Yeah, you'll never get those 3 years back, Marion. But you've got a lot. I know, but you've got a lot of years ahead of you, and you can rebuild those bridges. Listen, I thank you both so much for joining us this morning to discuss this, and good luck with today. And Ian, thank you very much as well. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Cheers. That was both Marion and the Conservative MP for Milton Keynes South, Ian Stewart, who's the patron of Marion's support group, GranPart. I have to say, just before we go to travel, if you are, if that story touches a nerve with you, if you're a grandparent, if you experienced that, I'd love to hear from you. Please give us a call, 03459 455 555, or even text me on 81333. Start your message with 3CR and tell us your story.